Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fred Samama, and I'm honored to moderate the panel Transition Plans and Their Financing. But let me start with a striking observation. At the COP21, everyone woke up on climate change, and everyone followed their own objectives green bonds, low carbon indices, NDCs, and so on. At the COP26, we observed exactly the opposite trend. All the players are now converging on the same objective, being carbon neutral. Investors representing $130 trillion took such a commitment. 1 basis point of it is $13 billion. Countries representing 75% of the total emissions took a similar commitment. Some of them are even legally binding. And so when you have the same objectives for investors and governments, it's becoming the new normal. The question is how to do it. And here there are two schools of thoughts. The very first one is to reshuffle portfolios regularly accordingly with the IPCC carbon budget. The European indices are going into that direction. The second school of thought is to look for the trajectories of the corporates in the future. And today, we will focus on this latter approach. And for that, we are extremely fortunate because we have the leaders of the industry in all the possible segments corporates, development banks, policymakers, and supervisors. So, to name them, we have, by alphabetical order, Magali Anderson, Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer at Holcim, Sarah Bredon, Executive Director, Financial Stability and Risk, and member of Financial Policy Committee, Bank of England. We have Alice Carr, Executive Director for Public Policy at GFANS, and Bruno Carrasco, Director General, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the Asian Development Bank. I will ask the panelists 3 rounds of questions, very simple, for 3-4 minutes, and then we will open the floor to a Q&A session. The questions will be, what are credible transition plans? What are the challenges and how to address them? And I will start with the corporate, Magali, then the development bank, Bruno, then the policymaker, Alice, and last but not least, the supervisor, Sarah. So Magali, the floor is yours. What is a credible transition plan for Holcim? Thank you.
Thank you, Frederic, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here. I would like to start a little bit before, actually, even before COP21, when, as a cement industry, we started lowering our carbon emissions. So at Holcim, what it means is that we have now lowered our emission by 29% compared to 1990. But really, when things accelerated is between the two COPs that you mentioned, is almost 3 years ago when both the board of director and the CEO decided to create the position of Chief Sustainability Officer at the executive committee. What it actually means, it means that you are now putting sustainability at the heart of every single decision making and investment decision, strategy, etc. of the company. And that's for me absolutely key. That's if you don't do that, I don't think you can have a credible transition plan because you are not truly embedding sustainability. So now that I've given the overall things, let me go slightly on the details. We started the journey by we accelerated the journey again. It was not a start by committing to the business ambition 1.5 degree, which is basically signing the net zero pledge. But we only did it when we had our 2030 target validated by Science Based Target Initiative, SBTI. And this is part of the credibility you're asking about, which is not just we shoot for a 30 years so far ahead target. We actually say what we are going to do in the next 10 years and what's our target. And not only we had SBTI validating it, but shortly after, we took a sustainability-linked bond of 850 million. We've taken another two on the Swiss market since, the first ones of the Swiss market, where basically, I think everyone in this audience understand what it means. It means that if we don't reach our target, it's going to cost us a few million. So we are clearly saying we are putting money on the table on our target. We're not just a target. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, who cares? Type of thing. So that's really that. Now to make these targets was a journey in itself because we involved more than 100 people across countries, across experts, etc. Because it's not the target that's important. It's making sure you have the buy-in from everybody so that you are going to be able to hit the floor and run immediately and start implementing immediately. So that's really certainly what took the most work. Since we have been, we are monitoring obviously, but since the big of the work has been to do a roadmap. So today I have a roadmap for every single unit, every single cement plant in every single country. So I know exactly who needs to do what. I have a dashboard, so I can do a bit of a name and shame to make sure that people keep being motivated in doing it. But I think it's super important because the risk, and it was really a big takeout of the COP26. My new hashtag is from pledge to action. One of the big risks of all the pledges you mentioned, they may be all converging, but now we are going to be judged on how we deliver because that's really what's important. So a lot of our work has been in the last since we made the pledge a year and a half ago, has really been on the implementation side, which we are learning because operations are very good at making financial budgets. I've been doing that for decades and they are very well trained for that. But to make prediction year on year on what's going to be the CO2 reduction, their capex needs, etc., it's a much trickier exercise, at least something that we haven't done in the past. So that's really the journey on for us how to make it credible, and now we have to be judged on our results, which is really what counts, on our yearly reduction as per plan.
Excellent. So your vivid example that it's feasible with the right position, with skin in the game, and with the dashboards and so on to monitor that. It's absolutely perfect, and for a company like yours, it's great. Bruno, we are shifting towards Asia. So what about you?
Very much, Frederick. Let me begin by thanking the organizers. It's a pleasure to join you in this Green Swan 2022 event. I'd like to thank the organizers for the kind invitation. From a multilateral development bank, we have a very important role to help mobilize a lot of the financing that will be required. Just to give you a little bit of background, Asia Pacific accounts for slightly over 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And it's also disproportionately vulnerable to weather events such as floods, droughts, and typhoons. As such, we tend to refer to the fact that the battle on climate change will be won or lost in Asia. And as an aspiring climate bank for the region, we are certainly deeply committed to supporting our developing member countries, or DMCs, in accomplishing the net zeros. Now, how do we do that? I would like to raise three key features that characterize our work. First of all, as all development banks, we have a pipeline of bankable projects that in this case supports our climate financing. We have a very strong and close relationship with our member countries, governments, stakeholders, private sector, that facilitates both an important policy dialogue that is essential to get governments and stakeholders to commit to this work. And also we're a very important convener. So that is essential. And thirdly, we need to contribute to scalability by de-risking projects through such things as our guarantees, syndications, as well as, of course, blended finance solutions that can help leverage the private financing that we will need. Without private financing, we will simply not get there. Now, at COP26 last year, we committed to raising our own source financing for climate change to approximately $100 billion cumulatively of own sources between 2019 and 2030, which is about $8 billion per annum. And of course, by crowding in additional $18 to $30 billion of private commercial financing. Of the $100 billion, $34 billion is targeting adaptation, $66 billion is targeting mitigation. By 2030, 3 of every 4 of our committed operations will be supporting climate change. Now, how do we engage with our countries? We recognize the importance of having to move towards more ambitious national development contributions. And the way we do this is we have an increasing role towards such things as aligning our operations with the Paris Agreement commitments, while at the same time charting an equitable path to net zero. And this involves various upstream work focusing on the NDCs, carbon markets, and the development of a sound and ambitious long-term national strategies. Now, alongside MDBs, we're also working together on long-term strategies, and this is an important initiative aiming at supporting developing countries in the preparation as well as implementation of the long-term low greenhouse gas and climate resilient development strategies. Now, looking a little bit more, drilling into how we do this, we adopt a holistic approach, basically looking at three prongs to mobilizing and building collaboration among the three prongs in various dimensions. I'd like to just pick up on three. First, we position ourselves at the upstream to address some of the challenges that would impact bankability. So, for example, our Office of Public-Private Partnerships have the mandate of transaction advisory services, and this, along with supporting TA resources, have been able to look at targeting climate actions. For example, we're structuring bankable public-private partnership projects in the renewable energy sector that attracts private capital and enables governments to achieve record low tariffs through market competition. A second position that we take is working downstream with private sector clients to finance and mobilize financing for bankable projects, including developing regional climate bond markets and guaranteed facilities. And finally, third, we are very excited at contributing to create new platforms for innovative vehicles to catalyze climate finance. I will come back to these points hopefully in later rounds, but these would include such things as the energy transition mechanism to accelerate decarbonization through market-based approaches, as well as debt financing platforms to expand the pool of bankable, sustainable infrastructure projects. I'll pause there. Thank you. Back to you, Patrick.
Excellent, Bruno. We see that we need to be present at all the different steps of the process and to invent new ways. You mentioned blended finance and something to come about the new mechanism. So it's about being systematic and thinking slightly out of the box. Superb. Alice, $130 trillion. So.
Thanks very much, Fred. So as mentioned, COP26 was obviously transformative. And one of the initiatives that was building in the run-up to COP26 was that the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero would bring together the global financial system with commitments to transition their financed emissions to net zero by 2050. And we have more than 450 members in 45 countries, and they've all committed under UN-convened alliances to undertake this transition by 2050 and also to have made significant progress by 2030 such that it's credible that they get to 2050. They're all in different sectoral alliances. We can come back and talk about the similarities and differences in it later, but essentially what we're now doing is trying to give them the tools to deliver on this commitment. And so we would be consulting in about 10 days' time on a global framework for financial institutions transition planning. And we think this will be really important. For those of you that are familiar with the kind of process for developing the TCFD, there are some similarities. So we've convened the private sector. We're also drawing on technical experts and civil society to set out what we think a good transition plan for a financial institution should have. And of course, this is what they now need to start using in order to turn their commitments into tangible action. And so what we're looking for there, and I mean, as Magali mentioned, that that's the critical thing, that they now have to start kind of looking through the whole of their business strategy, their business activities, and thinking about how to perform this transition. So without going into too much detail, I'll just give a little preview. And basically, we're saying that a financial institution transition plan should have 5 main elements. The first of those is obvious, that they should set out very clearly and transparently what they're trying to do by when. Now, everyone in our alliance has to hit 2050. Some of them are actually got slightly earlier targets, and they all have a different kind of, I guess, glide path into that final end date. And so we want them to be transparent about what they're trying to get done by when, what their starting point is. We want them to explain at high level what the key components of their policy are to deliver on this strategy. We also want them to then drill down and explain business line by business line how they're going to do this, which I think is also similar to the experience of Wholesome. That we have to understand how each firm is precisely going to deliver on these commitments across their business activities, and more importantly, they need to understand how they're going to do it and make sure that everyone's pointing in the right directions internally. We also put quite a heavy weight on engagement, because obviously as the financial sector, it's in some ways a tougher challenge, because you're essentially having to work to transition the households and the businesses that you're financing, and that's obviously an incredibly challenging thing to do. So we've put very high up our list of things that they need to engage with. It is an engagement strategy with households, with businesses, and with government to try and create the right conditions to bring about the transition in the real economy that they will need to hit their own targets. We also, of course, have quite an extensive set of guidance about metrics and targets. We need everyone to be clear about their baseline, about where they're trying to get to. We need to have clarity on the progress that they're making. This is a slightly tricky area because there's no one perfect measure of how you're doing. So we set out the different commonly used and validated approaches that they should draw on. And then finally, we have obviously quite a chunky section on governance. And again, this important point about making sure that everyone from the board down are taking responsibility for this transition process, which is going to affect the whole business. I just end by saying that in developing the transition planning framework, we realize that there are other tools that are needed. And so we're also issuing materials on those in about 10 days' time, and they include guidance for financial firms on how to use sectoral pathways, which is a very important aspect of developing a transition plan if you're a financial institution. We have some expectations from the financial sector for real economy firms and what they would like to see disclosed. We have some work underway this year to further develop ways of measuring portfolio alignment, because that's obviously quite an important metric for many of our members. And then finally, we can come back and talk about this. We've started thinking about how we can take a more structured and transparent approach to dealing with the thornier end of the issue. So the high carbon emitting assets that need a structured and managed phase out if we're to succeed. But we can come back and talk about that. Thanks.
Excellent, Alice. And as you said, we see a lot of similarities with Holcim about clarity, about intermediate steps, about governance, and so on. So the $130 trillion we all know was a big splash. And now the good news is that the way to achieve that is getting established. So we will read carefully the documents in 10 days. So thank you. And last but not least, it all started with a famous speech at the Bank of England on climate change and central bank. And you stepped in, Sarah. So now you have this responsibility to continue this leadership. So it's up to you.
Thanks very much, Frederica, and thanks for the invite to be here. I thought I'd add a perspective of a central bank and financial regulator on these issues. And it goes back, Frederic, as you said, to that very first comment that we have a tragedy of the horizon here. We need to look forwards and we need to get to net zero so that we've stabilized our atmosphere and also managed the risks. it's easy to say net zero is the destination. However, the pathway to get there is much more challenging. And that pathway matters. It matters for the environment, it matters for the economic costs, and it matters for the impact on different groups in our society as well. And a really important foundational point that we see from the Bank of England as a macroprudential authority, as somebody who cares about the system as a whole, is that our actions to get us to net zero have got to green our future economy and not just invest in the currently green. In that context, transition plans are absolutely foundational because they give us the confidence to take that nuanced approach to say we are investing in the greening, we are not just kicking the can down the road. As Alice said, the challenge for the financial sector here is substantial. The financial sector is a mirror of its real economy customers, the businesses and households that it finances. And so its transition plan can only credibly be based off those transition plans that its businesses and households customers have. That's a hell of a challenge, and is why mandatory transition plans and transparency are absolutely foundational to success here. The other thing that's really important is credibility. What do I mean by credibility? Assurance that we are making change, not just that we will make change. Secondly, that it is driving the right decisions, that it is directing capital to where capital needs to go. And thirdly, that there are consequences when transition plans are not followed. So for me, as a macroprudential authority, transition plans are absolutely foundational. They give us our strategy that gets us from where we are to where we need to be, which is net zero. However, as I'm sure we'll come on to, there are many challenges along the way. Back to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the transition to the next round of questions about challenges. Absolutely, and I hear from your key message, the key message about accountability, and it's absolutely true. So now, yes, the challenges, and let's have the same order and start with Magali. And I just received a question from the audience: is when you implement such plans, what about your competitors? Is that a problem to be so ambitious, or can you stomach it, if I can say? So the floor is yours. What are the challenges on these transition plans?
So I will start with the challenges and go to the competition after. In terms of challenges, I think we're not. It's a bit back to what I was saying about the CSO being part of the executive committee. We're not talking here about small changes. We're talking about changing the business model of the company. It's as simple as that and as challenging as that. So changing the way we are doing business, the way we have been doing business for the last 100, 200 years, or more than 100 years on each legacy company. And what it actually means is, for example, stop trying to sell more concrete, but try to do more with less, and etc. So it's something that can be a bit shocking for investors when they hear that. But if you change the business model and start being incentivized by performance of how you build things instead of how much concrete you sell, then you change the paradigm. And that's what we are talking about. That's the type of challenge. And that's the reason why we need to look at it completely in the business model. So back in November, the Capital Market Day, we announced our new 2025 strategy, company strategy. And what was clear there is half of the targets were sustainability, half was financial. First time ever we do that, including some financial link to sustainability, such as sustainable financing, but also we committed to having 500 million green capex starting 2025. Last year we we spent 350 million. So it's not like we are waiting for 2025, but with this type of commitment. Then it's about transparency. Alice mentioned TCFD earlier. And in Switzerland, it has been voted that TCFD reporting disclosure will be compulsory from 2023, so tomorrow. And we are already working on it. So what we did, and we were the first in the sector to do that, we wrote a climate report, which is very much aligned to TCFD disclosure, disclosing CapEx, disclosing all of this. And we put it to the vote of our shareholders at our last AGM. We had a 90% positive vote, which is great, but also it's great it gives us 10% improvement points to work on. So I think though that's an internal challenge. The other challenge, the technical challenge, is the traditional lever that I mentioned earlier will take us to 2030 between bracket easily. There will be a moment where CCUS will be needed. And even though we don't need it the next 5, 6, 7 years, when we need it, we will need to have the right financial put in place, because that's one that as a company, we won't be able to absorb by ourselves. And this is where we need to develop partnerships, both technically, but also on the financial side. We are not resting and waiting. We have 30 pilots ongoing, but they are only pilots. So transformation from pilot to real deal is again both technical but also financial. This is where cost of CO2 can help if you have the right border mechanism in place. And in Europe, if you don't have it in other countries, it could be complicated, except if you have government or innovation type of bonds that are helping you. So that's definitely the future challenge. And to finish with the competition, we are part of an association called Global Cement and Concrete Association. And just before COP26, we announced, and it's a work that I was a co-chair of, we announced that concrete will go to zero to 2050. So that means CEOs of companies that represent 80% of the produced cement in the world outside China have all aligned to all say we will all go to zero by 2050. And I think it's an important discussion we are having at GCCA, because the sector has to move. It's no point of having Holcim moving. The entire sector has to move. The entire sector represents a fair bit of CO2. We need to all go together. So I think when it comes to sustainability, yes, we want to be ahead. Yes, I want to be better than my competitor by nature. But the overall, if the sector doesn't move together, we haven't achieved anything.
And I would take the honor of being your moderator by asking you a question. You said very clearly, and you started with that, we are changing the business model. Does it mean that you're working as well on the nature of your investors? You know, the presence of long-term investors versus short-term investors? Or you think that you can go through that journey with your current structure of shareholders? Because
I'm not sure that we have the luxury to choose our investors, but we do engage with very transparent dialogue with them to explain what we do. So I myself host a lot of investors' calls where they don't want to talk to the CFO, they want to talk to me. And I am always amazed by the amount of knowledge of the investors. They are extremely well informed. They know exactly the right question. So, you know, the little fine line that you put in your report that no one reads, they read it. So it's really, which is challenging, and I appreciate it because it's also a guidance. But no, we don't choose them, but we have those dialogues very open with them.
Yeah, it's super important because it's a way to change the presence of your long-term investors by allocating time and so on. So that's a mechanism. Bruno, challenges. I'm sure you have a long list of challenges.
Thank you very much again, Frederic. Yes, I think that what we look at in the context of the NDCs is that for the transition plans and financing, we need to be making sure that they are sufficiently of high level of ambition. And I think Sarah also referred to the importance of the pathways and the need to have timely, credible delivery of the net zero targets. The reality, however, is not always the case. If we look at it again more from a country perspective across Asia Pacific, we have to recognize that there are important trade-offs right now that many of the countries are facing in terms of prioritizing a limited set of scarce resources. The COVID-19 pandemic in Asia Pacific has led to a large crunch in terms of an economic downturn in 2020, not experienced since back in the 1960s. So this is much worse than the Asian crisis and the crises that we've had thereafter. But we do recognize that, again, with the trade-offs, there has been now an increase in those living under poverty by about 175 million as a result of this downturn. And of course, that there's limited fiscal headroom to sustain the economic recovery and competing demands on investments in such things as digital technologies, greater investment in health, universal health coverage, education, ed tech. So the choices are quite stark. To assist these countries to formulate and mainstream the climate actions, both in terms of adaptation and resilient policies, we prepare what we refer to as country climate risk profiles. Now these are, in some ways, they outline the changes in key climate parameters, so it's quite dynamic, as well as the impact of these changes on the communities, livelihoods, and economies, and trying to provide a more friendly technical resources to facilitate the diagnostics, the policy dialogue, and the strategic planning that we were referring to. We have a climate change operational framework that we have in place from 2017 through to 2030 that will provide a framework for our countries to enable to look at implementing their international commitments to address the climate change while pursuing at the same time sustainable development. In terms of the Paris Alignment Agreement, ADB is committed to having 100% alignment of the sovereign portfolio by just over a year from now, 1st July 2023, as well as 85% of the non-sovereign, with the remaining coming through by 1st July 2025. We've also introduced a new energy policy that supports universal access to reliable and affordable energy services, while promoting, of course, the low-carbon transition, which is fundamental in Asia and the Pacific. We also look at the importance of policies to unlock some of the reforms that are required. So, for example, our energy policy says a categorical no to any new coal power financing. Now, of course, to support such low-carbon transition, we need to recognize that countries need to have access to new technologies. We've referred to before green hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization and storage, and others. And at the same time, we have to ensure affordability. So we're able to mobilize enough resources. We're able to be to engage with countries, be able to seek more ambitious nationally determined contributions. And I think that's how we make the progress that's required. When it comes to coal, I want to pick up a little bit more on this example. We have a stock and a flow problem. Now, while it is looking increasingly likely that we're going to be able to hold back the flow problem, we still face the constraint of the stock problem, the large number of coal-fired power plants that still exist. So what do we need? So here, I'll talk a little bit more maybe later on the energy transition mechanism that we launched at COP26, which really serves as a blended finance platform for decarbonizing that energy mix. The energy transition mechanism will also help solve one of the biggest problems in our region, which is retiring coal-fired power plants faster and repurposing it for these plants for sources to be sources of new renewable energy. So these are some of the kind of the dilemmas and the trade-offs that we face in the region. And we've got a few more solutions that maybe with time I'd like to highlight in the next round. Thank you so much.
Excellent. I just have a question about these country profiles. Is that something that is public information, or is that purely?
Yes, that's correct. We have, as almost all our documentation, it's there for public information. So I'll be able to send this to you, perhaps not now, but in the coming hours. Thank you.
Maybe we can talk about that in the future, because as it's all about blended finance and mobilizing the different players to share that knowledge that you have developed, could be a way as well to accelerate the mobilization, but another conversation. Alice, plenty of challenges. You already mentioned some of them.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely challenging for the financial sector. I mean, I think one encouraging thing is that, I mean, as you alluded to earlier, we've reached a sort of critical mass in the GFANZ coalition that we have to achieve real economic transition. We have, as you mentioned, the firms that have joined have combined balance sheets of about just over 130 trillion. And that's actually about nearly 40% of total global private financial sector assets. And so that's a really big share. And it isn't feasible for all of our members to transition by themselves, just diversifying away from the path that the real economy is on. So I think the important thing there, though, is that it means that our incentives are all well aligned. So we have governments saying that they've committed to net zero, trying to deliver on that. We have financial firms, we have real economy firms in increasing numbers. And so that's a really important thing that we're all sort of pushing in the same direction. I was just going to mention a few of the challenges we're thinking through at the sort of high level, because I know we're going to come on and talk about some of the specifics in the next round. But I mean, it's clear that in the current conjuncture that we have to try for a transition that is ambitious but also orderly, because we face, you know, a very difficult economic period, and additionally we have clear problems with energy markets, and energy related emissions are a very significant share of global emissions, and we have to be fast, we have to be ambitious, but we have to be orderly, because if we don't achieve the orderly part, we will lose the license to carry on with this transition. So it's a point sometimes made, isn't it, in recent days to me, that isn't it dangerous that the financial system is trying to do this transition given these challenges? And I think the answer is we have to do it, but we have to do it in as orderly a way as we can. I think when we look at the transition, we're looking across all of the types of activities that the financial sector currently finances and will need to finance in future. So we try to look at how they might approach financing green solutions. So those are, climate solutions and as mentioned, CCS will become increasingly important for firms that are trying very hard to bear down on their emissions, but there may be a residual part that it's difficult to completely eliminate. So we need to ensure that investment is going to those future technologies. We need to ensure we keep financing the already green. We need to ensure that we work really hard to finance a transition in the real economy, which accounts for the majority of the economy. It is effectively corporates that may have started to transition, some may have not started at all, but they need to transition if they're going to be a thriving business for future decades. And we also need to talk about, as mentioned, the tricky end, the coal end. And it's kind of quite easy in Europe to say, notwithstanding our energy challenges, to say that we will reduce our reliance on coal. But obviously, in some parts of the world, coal is a really chunky share of energy generation in countries where actually there isn't even enough energy generated. So we really need to work together to help phase that out. So what we're asking our firms to begin to do is take a much more structured and thoughtful approach, not just to coal, but to all fossil fuel activities, so that it's much clearer to external stakeholders why any investments are being made, why they're consistent with net zero transition, and so on. I was going to mention finally as well, just the emerging market piece. So some key emitters are stepping up and taking quite an ambitious approach to delivering on their carbon reduction commitments, and they're going to have to perform very, very significant energy transitions over quite short time horizons. And so one thing that's good about having our whole membership committed to net zero is that we have many global firms in our membership who need to be able to keep financing things cross-border that are net zero aligned. And so to the extent that we can all work together and with countries trying to perform those transitions, we're pretty confident that we could crowd in a lot more private finance than currently is available for those kinds of projects and so on. Thanks.
Thank you, Alice. You said it at the very beginning that the countries being committed and so on. But are you not slightly nervous that regulations is lagging on climate change coming from governments, and then investors could be in a complicated spot, if I can say, being on the one hand committed to align their portfolios, on the other hand, the lack of concrete regulations make that commitment possibly challenge on the fiduciary responsibility approach?
Definitely. So we spend quite a lot of time in GFANZ working with our members to help them deliver on their commitments. But we also spend a lot of time talking to policymakers about what the financial sector needs from them. Because I think what we could say is the financial sector is stepping up. It is starting to take a more purposeful approach to meeting these commitments set. But if that's all that happens and there isn't continued progress at the political level in advanced economies and emerging markets, I think you're right. At some point, we'll run into the sand, and we'll have we won't only have a challenge for investors, we'll have a challenge for all of us, because it will mean that our ability to hit 1.5 is gone. So I think we all have to play our part and keep the pressure up on one another to make sure we deliver. Thanks.
That's a very good answer. That we either we create a positive cycle and each force is reinforcing the other one, and otherwise everything falls apart. And we have to keep on pushing in the right direction. So the word orderly was pronounced by Alice. So that's a good transition for the Bank of England that just released a report on the different scenarios. Orderly could be one, and there could be some others. But what are the challenges?
Frederick, I see two challenges for the financial system, and there are three consequences that I worry about on the back of that, and a number of things that we've done in response. The first challenge that I see is the one that you just asked Alice about, that we don't have the certainty about the climate policy pathways that we need to be able to support that orderly transition. Neither do we have certainty about the technical environment, the future innovation that is going to help us drive change. And of course, the world changes and we learn more about how we might need to adapt the transition as recent events have played out. So that's my first challenge, lacking the certainty about the technological and climate policy pathway from here. The second challenge for the financial system and us as the financial regulators is the uncertainty that there is about where the real economy starts from and the pathway and the strategies that it has. TCFD made a lot of progress, but still in the early days, more to do. Transition plans, early days, and that underlay, those two factors underlay the climate scenario exercise that we did, where we sought to understand what might happen to the largest banks and insurers that we regulate in a variety of possible future states of the world. And we encouraged them, and indeed they did engage with their economy customers to understand what future risks they might see. So those are the challenges. What are the potential consequences that might worry us? The first is greenwashing, that we attach labels to things that we think are supporting the transition to net zero, but are not doing so. That matters because we risk losing trust in the role of the financial system in supporting the transition. But it also matters because of the substantive consequence that if we think we've been investing in the green and we've not, we've not been making the progress that we need. That then creates the risk of a latent disorderly transition, as you talked about. And our scenario exercise, the results of which we published last week, showed very clearly that the risk to the system, the risks to businesses and households are greater in such a latent disorderly transition. And the third thing that worries me, given those challenges of an absence of data and an absence of certainty about our future pathway, is that we have paper decarbonisation, that we focus on investing in the currently green because that's easy and certain, rather than putting our efforts into greening the future economy, which is what is actually required if we are to reduce emissions and so solve the problem that we all want to solve. To support that, we've had a swift response from financial regulators and international disclosure standards to try and fill that gap, to recognise the uncertainty and to drive the right behaviours in the financial system. But there's an enormous amount of working together that is required here. Public sector, private sector, finance, industry, regulators of the real economy, regulators of the financial system. But maybe I'll end with a positive. One of the things that came through, Frederica, in our climate scenario exercise, was that there were, for the financial system, substantial opportunities in the transition. And so it is worth investing in understanding what the possible future risks are in order to identify the sorts of business model changes that Magali described at the start, and then be a supportive influence and a supportive partner as we move forward from here.
I 100% agree. When the world is changing, it's a lot about risk and opportunities, absolutely. And I fully agree with you. So the last round of questions in the next 10 minutes. So, okay, we see that all the bricks are here, they're moving the right direction. How can we still handle the current challenges and accelerate the process for corporates, development banks, and so on? So I get it. How can we accelerate? How can we overcome the still existing challenges?
No, I think, I mean, what Sarah just said is music to my ears, because we need that cooperation, right? We need that collaboration, that people don't see us as a big emitting company, but as a, I love to say, when people say you're part of the hard to abate sector, I say, no, I'm part of the full of opportunities sector. And I think if we all agreed with that, if we all agreed that cement is needing, urbanization trend is happening, we need cement for the energy transition, etc., etc. So help us to decarbonize faster, and then we will be able to accelerate. So I think from a company point of view, we are in a journey which is already an accelerated journey. We understand that we need to accelerate more, because it's never good enough. 2050 is super challenging, but would be better if we could go earlier. And I'm just trying to go a bit fast because I'm conscious of time. We are already doing the SBTI. We are already doing the disclosure with TCFD. I treat my sustainability KPI internally the same way than financial. When they are being validated by a third party, I get them monthly on my desk, etc., etc. We already do all of that. Maybe not everybody does. Maybe other people need to join that. But for us, what needs to happen is exactly what Sarah just mentioned. I think if we were having that collaboration where we get supported and we work on how we change the model, how we change the paradigm to get to the future, then it would accelerate currently what we are doing.
Absolutely. And when we prepared that panel, we had a conversation on the fact that you already have this SBTI and so on and so on. And maybe by delivering as well a carbon guidance, meaning how you see your future emissions that will help investors prepare their portfolios. So it's a message as well for the policymaker. It's not only about the disclosure of the current carbon footprint, but we could think about, let's say, the 3-year carbon guidance as we have earnings guidance. So that will make the portfolio slightly more forward-looking. Bruno.
Sorry about that. Yes, thank you. Good points now being brought up by everyone. In terms of the solution to the challenges, I would say that we generally follow a 2-step process. First, we need to put in place a robust monitoring and accountability mechanism. And second, and in parallel, it's all about setting incentives, right, to pursue a greater transfer of the resources that I mentioned to countries in this case, but also being able to tap into resources and be able to mobilize more private financing. So I think with this dual approach, we can enhance the level of commitment and ensure that countries and financial institutions follow these paths. I think it's also important to recognize that resource mobilization and allocation are not trivial exercises. I'd just like to give 3 very quick examples of work that we're doing. We have the Nationally Determined Contributions Advance work, which was designed by ADB, and it's a dedicated platform to support our DMCs in their NDC implementation, focusing on 3 outputs: the implementation of the NDCs themselves in selected countries, financial mechanisms to develop the climate actions, and mechanisms to measure, monitor, and report on those commitments that they make under the Paris Agreement. For sovereign nations, the transition plans are very critical. We need to be able to support the monitoring, reporting, and verification systems within these countries. So arguably, an important action is for countries to agree, to your point, Frederick, on such things as laws, regulations that can guide financial institutions, such as banks, pension funds, insurance companies, towards providing capital for sustainable finance, in line with the recommendations from the network of central banks and supervisors for greening the financial system. Our dedicated policy-based lending for climate change, and we just took to our board the first one on the Philippines yesterday, will allow us to undertake many of the reforms that will be required to remove the distortions and facilitate investment, including private investment, into this area. The use of regulatory capital to support the transition is also promising and deserves further contribution. 2 quick examples of how we look at incentives and looking at more innovative structures. We're excited about a couple of them. First one is on setting up new platforms to catalyze investments in sustainable infrastructure in Asia. Many of you may have heard we are partnering with HSBC, Temasek, and Clifford Capital Holdings to set up debt financing platforms to expand the pool of bankable sustainable infrastructure projects, increase the risk return profile of these projects, and attract financing from private investors. Here, the key point that I'd like to raise is that the platform aims to turn marginally bankable projects into bankable ones by, again, that idea of blended capital, providing concessional capital, and addressing the policy and regulatory constraints that we know undermine private investment in sustainable infrastructure. Now, the platform also will apply international best practices for ESGs in line with such things as safeguard standards set by international financial institutions. And it may also consider emerging initiatives such as the Fast Sustainable Infrastructure label, a globally applicable label for project demonstrating significant positive sustainable performance. My very last point, and recognizing that BIS is part of the organizers, we have, of course, a Green and Blue Bond Framework and BIS Asian Green Growth Fund. So under the Green and Blue Bond Framework, ADB supports our DMCs seeking to deliver environmentally sustainable growth to reduce poverty, improve the quality of life by issuing bonds. Since our first issuance, a maiden bond in green bond in 2015, ADB has now issued approximately 10.3 billion equivalent in green and blue bonds in 16 different currencies. ADB's first dual tranche blue bonds with $300 million was issued last year to help raise needed capital. We are also collaborating with BIS under the BIS Asian Green Growth Fund, US dollar denominated open-ended fund developed to channel central bank reserves through investments in high quality green bonds that, of course, meet internationally accepted standards for financing investments in environmentally friendly projects in critical areas such as renewable energy and energy efficiency. Together with two other green bond funds issued by the BIS since 2019, this fund will jointly manage $3.5 billion in green bonds for central banks and other official other official sector investors. The combination of ADB's growing pipeline of investable projects, which I referred to earlier, and this green bond program will help pool additional resources into green infrastructure financing in Asia and the Pacific. And finally, I wanted to mention that we will be issuing our first TCFD report in September. So in line with the other MDBs, we're also catching up. Thank you very much.
And very quickly, Magali started with a new business model, and between the lines, you have a new business model because you're partnering now with the private sector, and you're bringing your resources to unlock the investment capability, something that IFC did, that European Investment Bank does now, AIB, and so on. So we see a new business model emerging from developing bank, but blended finance, and it's very fascinating. Alice, in few.
Yeah, I'll be super quick because I know we're nearly out of time now. So a couple of quick points. One was for our membership, we'd like them obviously to start undertaking transition planning with energy as quickly as possible and to learn by doing, just as we did with TCFD disclosures, so that we can kind of raise standards as quickly as possible. I think it's, despite the fact that some policymakers are on the front foot on this topic, it's still a relatively new topic, I would say, across the global regulatory community. And I think we'd, as the financial sector, welcome more scrutiny from policymakers and more engagement from them to make sure that what we're delivering meets their expectations. And of course, if they want to set formal expectations, such as the UK has indicated it will do, I think we're happy with that. I wanted to add that the international financial architecture right now is not perfectly well set up to really crowd in private capital to support emerging markets looking to transition. There are lots of positive initiatives, just as Bruno highlighted a few, but there's a lot more we could do there. And if we really ramped up public-private collaboration and thought ambitiously, we could really move the dial there. Thanks.
I fully agree. The last word for you, Sarah.
I'll be super brief. 3 things. The first thing we should do is collaborate and engage. We should shake hands and reach out to one another rather than throw in horror at how difficult a job it is. We should identify where uncertainty is greatest and clarity is most needed, and we should identify where financing is going to be a challenge, the sorts of blended financing issues that Bruno and Alice were just talking about. The second thing, we should embrace uncertainty in support of that, use scenario analysis to identify what might happen and enable us to think about what strategies are robust to that uncertainty. And then the third thing we all need to do is build a green market infrastructure that looks forward and supports the transition. So that's forward-looking labels and taxonomies, forward-looking disclosure, forward-looking transition plans. And if we get those, we as central banks will be able to add up at the level of the system and see if collectively we are doing what we need to in getting us to net zero.
I fully agree. It's all about pragmatism, I agree, and reinforcing the entire system. We could have talked about cat bonds. We could have talked about how to reinforce the presence of long-term investors, how to help corporates absorb the shocks and so on. So I fully agree that the entire system that must be reinforced. It's time to, so first I would like to thank all of you for your very thorough answers. I'm very sure that all the participants really benefited from your insights. And it's time for me now to introduce the next panel. It's about financing green innovation and investment, and with introductory remarks by Laura Cozy from the International Energy Agency. Again, a very warm thank you to all of you for your presence today. Thank you very much.